From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Islamist terror appears to have returned to the United States with an attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day morning that killed 15 and injured dozens more. What do we know about Shamsud-Din Jabbar and his motives for driving a truck through pedestrians on Bourbon Street? Plus, the 119th Congress convenes on Friday with Speaker Mike Johnson's hold on his job still in doubt. What happens if he loses that vote, and what would it tell us about the Republican ability to govern with both houses of Congress and the White House under their control? Welcome to Potomac Watch, and Happy New Year. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, and I'm here with colleagues Bill McGurn and Kyle Peterson to kick off the new year in a sad one with the attack in New Orleans. The FBI has identified the driver of the truck that sped around a police car barricade and down a sidewalk and killed 15 people as 42-year-old Texan and Army veteran Shamsud-Din Jabbar. Police say he traveled from the Houston area where he was active in a local mosque to New Orleans to carry out his attack. Details have been coming with some caution, but trickling out Thursday, the FBI had another press conference and made it clear that Jabbar had posted messages saying that he was loyal to ISIS or Islamic State. An ISIS flag was on his truck. So it would appear that his motivation was Islamist radicalism inspired by Islamic State. No word on whether he had any associates overseas or any connections overseas. The FBI now say that he acted alone after a day earlier saying that they did not believe that that was the case. Let's listen to New Orleans Police Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick describe how Jabbar committed his act of terror.
This particular terrorist drove around onto the sidewalk and got around the hard target, where he did have a car there, we had barriers there, we had officers there, and they still got around. Now, the wedges that you see out there as well, we knew that that had malfunction problems. And I want you to understand, let's say we put the wedge up and it got stuck. There is no way that ambulance could get in or out. People couldn't get in and out. So we knew that these were malfunction. So we did indeed have a plan, but the terrorist defeated it.
The reference to the wedges is to these barriers that have been put up in places around the country and in parts of New Orleans to protect pedestrians from exactly this kind of event. The good news, though, Bill, is that the FBI now says he acted alone. This means that they don't believe there's an active terror cell, and it would appear, if that's the case, to have been an example of essentially self-actualized radicalization.
Yeah, there's a lot more of that going on. If you look back 25 years to 2001, we had hijackers trained overseas, boarded planes in the U.S., had plotted it for a long time, took pilot lessons, and then commandeered the planes and ran them into buildings. We're not seeing that kind of stuff in recent years. It's very difficult to do that. What I think some of the terror groups found is that they put all this stuff on the internet. People can self-radicalize, and sometimes with the help of the local mosque, if there's a particular imam there or something that gives kind of supporting sermons and so forth. But it's much more of a danger because, yes, it means they're not doing the high-level things like knocking down the Twin Towers or destroying the Pentagon, but they do cause terror, as the people in New Orleans found out by a simple truck just drove in among them, mowed them down. So it's very hard in a free society to harden all our targets. In fact, it's impossible. So we have to be more aware of what's going on the internet, in mosques, in different associations, so we can monitor people that go on the grid, and we at least know what who they are and what kind of stuff they're listening to.
Well, it's much harder to do if they're not talking to others, right? If they're alone, that's harder to discover if they're working alone. Once they start to communicate in groups, there's a much better chance that one of the listeners in that group may be, Kyle, an FBI agent. That's how the FBI has discovered some of these cells that they have prosecuted over the years. They've just infiltrated it by having an agent sound sympathetic notes.
Right. And you can hope that the FBI is going to double down on efforts like that in the days and the weeks to come. Though, in fairness, Islamic Jihad terrorism has fallen from the public view, the public consciousness a little bit in recent years, but it hasn't necessarily fallen from the FBI's view. I mean, Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, has been warning about this for months. He said in testimony in October of 2023 that the Hamas attack on Israel and unfolding events in the Middle East were probably going to provide impetus, perhaps, for people who are homegrown terrorists or people who are communicating with others abroad to perpetrate attacks like this in the United States. There have been arrests before the 2024 election. October 8th, the Justice Department charged a citizen of Afghanistan residing in Oklahoma City for conspiring to conduct an election day terrorist attack in the United States. And so this has been a little bit off of the public's agenda, but this is the bread and butter of why we have an FBI and the kind of activity that the FBI is supposed to be tracking. And I think Bill's right. It's impossible to harden every public space. And if you have somebody who is self-radicalizing and not communicating in a group in that way, it's not necessarily easy to find those people. But that's what we have an FBI and federal agents to do their best at doing.
Well, but we know that they uncover, Bill, plots that they don't get credit for because they're never discovered, break things up. And frankly, they get some criticism when they make arrests. Sometimes they say, oh, well, you led these people on. They weren't really a threat, but you kind of encouraged them to cross a line and therefore you arrested them unduly. Or you mentioned this earlier, infiltrating a mosque, say, if they hear that there's a radicalization going on, or perhaps a particularly volcanic imam preaching somewhere, they can get criticized for that.
Yeah, and not only can they get criticized, they are criticized. When I was in the Bush White House, it seemed that every anti-terror initiative, you mentioned the monitoring of the mosque, was fought very hard by these liberal activist groups, where the U.S. government was the enemy, not the bad guys plotting against us. The courts mostly upheld what the president is doing. Popular progressive sentiment was decidedly operating the other way. I mean, the good news is that in today's world, it's very hard to go off the grid, to really go off the grid and not have identifying fingerprints. I don't mean just your fingers, but numbers like credit card numbers, birthdays, and so forth. And so once they suspect you, if they suspected Paul Jago, and they run a different number, your credit card numbers, they see a nexus of any links you might have with other people who are suspects. So they can learn a lot fast when they have someone to focus on. Of course, that's the whole issue, focusing on the right person before he's able to attack.
Right. And we're not talking here about surveilling mosques or Muslims simply because they're a mosque or a Muslim. You have to have some probable cause to do that, but that can be important. We'll learn more about what Jabbar's motives were, where he worshipped, apparently a mosque in Houston, and, other links that he may have or may not have had. We have had these cases of just individual self-radicalization before. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the explosion in Las Vegas on New Year's Day when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch, our daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion page, and I'm here with Kyle Peterson and Bill McGurn. Disquieting as well on New Year's Day was the explosion of a Tesla in Las Vegas. A man died on the scene, was now identified as Michael Livelsberger, a Special Forces soldier. It's not clear if this was an accident or intentional, or if there are any links at all to terrorist intent. The FBI said on Thursday morning that there was no known link between the New Orleans and Las Vegas events, but certainly it did lead to some concern because of the two events on the same day. And, it does, I think, underscore the fact, Kyle, that the Islamic terror threat, though it has been downplayed in recent years in the public mind, still very much with us. And many groups overseas, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, various branches of Al-Qaeda in different countries, is still active. A terror group, a branch of Al-Qaeda that had formed in Afghanistan, staged bombings in Moscow, for example, in recent years. So vigilance is very much still required. And you have to think that Kash Patel, President Trump's nominee to run the FBI, the minute he gets that job, he's going to be responsible for anti-terror activities and crime. And my recommendation to him would be focus on those and not on political revenge against Donald Trump's opponents.
Absolutely. Vigilance always needed. And the importance of having Federal Bureau of Investigation that is focused on these kinds of things is not to play down any FBI scandals or misbehavior in the past, but it's a big organization. Something like 40,000 people work for the FBI. And again, I think this just underscores the importance of having an FBI that is functioning. I mean, the other thought that I would add is just also underscores the U.S. interest in not having a vacuum in Syria, in the Middle East, in places that would allow for the reconstitution of ISIS that is acting as an inspiration to so many of these lone wolf attackers. I mean, there's a reason, again, even though it can be unpopular, there's a reason that the U.S. has some interest in those places and preventing the creation of safe harbors for terrorists, training camps, and so forth.